John 15:22 gives us a good opportunity to look at Greek that's rather vague, and you have to interpret it to make any sense of the verse. We're also going to break some of the rules that you learned in first year Greek, specifically how to translate the aorist in order to have proper English. Eime elthon, kai elalesa altois, hamartion uk echusen, nunde prophesin uk echusen, peri tes hamartius auton. Eime is normally translated somewhat idiomatically as unless or except, but I think in this case it's best to say if not. If not, I came and I spoke to them. I'm going to come back to those two verbs in a second. What is echosin? Well, if you learned your roots, you know that there is a verb ech that goes into the present as echo, right? But what's odd here is that ending. And what's happened here is that, first of all, you have an augment, so you get the lengthening to a diphthong. And then what you have is the normal third plural ending on me verbs. Me verbs are slowly going out of use in Greek, and you start seeing some overlapping. So, for example, if you look at the imperfect of didomy, it's edidason. So there's that ending that's being put into a non-me verb conjugation. Just those things happen. And just in case you are wondering about your memory work, this kind of augment is unusual. Normally, if you have a verb beginning with an epsilon, it's going to augment to an eta in the aorist or the imperfect. But here it's augmented to a diphthong. So this is all around a really strange form. Let me go ahead and finish the verse, and we're going to come back to something. But now they do not have an excuse, an unusual word, for or concerning their sin. Interesting, it's their plural, it's sin singular. Jesus is looking at the sin of these people as a whole. Okay, let's go back to how we're going to translate elthon and elalesa. Normally you would just say came and spoke or said. The problem is that this is going back into the past because it's an imperfect, and these actions have to occur before this action. How do you do that in English? You have to use the had word, and almost all the translations do that. So if I had not come and spoken to them, they would not be having sin. Okay, so you've got to go with had with those. But what on earth does this mean? This sin not having. See, the NRSV says they would not have sin, which I don't think is English, does not make any sense. NASB does the same thing. But even the ESV adds in the word guilty, which is certainly what the phrase means. They would not have been guilty of sin. And you find the same thing in the CSB, and the NIV, the NET, and the NLT. But please recognize it's not saying they didn't sin. You got to watch the imperfect here. They were not having sin. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that they weren't guilty of their sin. And the basic rule is you are not guilty of breaking a law that you're unaware of, at least to some extent. By the way, that's an interesting class discussion, isn't it? We have the same kind of sentiment in Romans, so it's probably worth talking about. So if I had not come and spoken to them, in other words, if I hadn't revealed the truth to them, they would not be guilty of sin. But now, the idea is because I have come and I have spoken to them, they have no excuse for their sin. So phrasing, obviously, you'd start a line there. End of a section, so you have a new one. And just to keep things on the page, I like putting prepositional phrases on their own line. Sometimes it's not really necessary. But here the main statement is they would not be having sin. They would not be guilty of sin. So what we're going to do is indent. If I had not come and spoken to them, there's no reason, I think, to make the two verbs parallel. It's pretty obvious. Then you have this post-positive here. So we'll get the conjunction out there where we can see it. But now they have no excuse. An excuse relative to what? An excuse relative to their sin. So pretty straightforward. And by the way, did you notice that you have may, which you normally have with a non-indicative verb, but is followed by indicative verbs? Well, the reason is that this is a second-class contrary to fact condition. So that explains the may. So if I had not come and spoken to them, even though I did, they would not be guilty of sin. So a little unusual to have may in an indicative, but that's why.